You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Cricket Podcast. We are doing our IPL preview countdown ahead of the 2023 season. We're down to the final two now. So our Patreon listeners have put in order where they think that people are going to finish. We've got, it's been a bit controversial, a little bit controversial.
We've had some twists.
We've had some twists, we've had some turns. And now we arrive with last year's runners-up scheduled to finish second for another time. It is Rajasthan Royals, the original champs of the IPL. But sadly for the Albion, it was a one-time thing. Sure, they were suspended for a couple of years, but they have reached the playoffs only 4 times since then. And I think this time they've got some retribution to dish out. They play in Jaipur. They are coached by Kumar Sangakkara, and they are led brilliantly by Sanju Samson. Their state animal, so we're doing fun facts if you're only just joining us. It is the ship of the desert, the animal known for going long times without water, without nourishment, much like the Royals are without trophies. It is the trusty, huge-hoofed camel. Reliable, dependable, can get the hump sometimes, but ultimately that's why they've got Ravi Ashwin. Strengths of this side, they've got plenty to shout about, I think, in this lineup. They've got the best white ball batter in the world in Universe Joss. He had a ridiculous last year, nearly all-time great stuff in the IPL. And it's quite difficult to expect that again from him, but it's Josh Buttler, right? Anything is possible. Sanju Samson is so important to this team. He's both the wicketkeeper, captain, and kind of what slots in at 4. And he does a pretty good job, if I'm perfectly honest. And again, we talked about Prithvi Shaw being kind of a selfless cricketer for the India team. Sanju Samson is certainly in that bracket as well. Good intent, great kind of nous is probably how I would articulate him. Shimron Hetmeyer, who Jack dislikes, has been immense over the last couple of years. But again, could that luck potentially run out? And then spin bowling wise, Ashwin, Chahal, they're lovely 8 overs to have. They've also got the spin options on the bench if they want to mix that up. And then they've managed to bring in, well, kind of fill their slot 8 gap. If you remember last season, they were kind of going in with 6 people who could bat and then going, wonder if the bowlers can do something special. But Trent Bolt and Jason Holder offering a nice mix of lengths and different arms. Weakness-wise, balance is a little bit tricky. They're doing things a little bit differently, and I quite respect that approach. But we thought they may have released Devdutt Padikkal to give themselves more opportunity in the auction and find themselves kind of a better fit in that all-rounder space. But never mind. They've reduced that tail, but it's not super reliable. If the top order don't fire, there's not too many runs left to play with. Lottery Krishna is out, which I think is quite a blow. And I'm not too convinced that they've got the death overs covered that brilliantly. Obed McCoy's kind of done that role for them, but how he fits into this 11 now, Jason Holder's there, I'm not so sure. You're kind of asking a lot of Kuldeep Sen or Navdeep Saini. Gents, we feeling positive, we feeling negative about the team I'm wearing a jersey for and the kind of pink hat on the door?
Well, they've sort of got the same problem, haven't they, as last year? You mentioned they've all, I guess, sort of improved on the sense that Jason Holder can bat and Obed McCoy doesn't. But Obed McCoy was brilliant last year when he came into the side, and I think he's carried that through really ever since. So I think losing that option with the ball may not necessarily be that good, but having the extra batter obviously does kind of smooth that out given the problems they had last year. It really was falling off a cliff, wasn't it? It was just sort of like, yeah, here are your batters, here are your bowlers. If the super sub allowed you to play an overseas player as your sub, they'd be absolutely fine. But unfortunately, they didn't read the rules, and you can't do that. So they're going to be.
I reckon if the impact sub is good this year, they will do it so the overseas player can be next year. Is my feeling.
I'd like to see that.
That would be interesting. It would make the
I just like 5 overseas.
Yeah, it would make the auction. Quite
Yeah, well, that would be better too. Right?
That would always be better. But yeah, I mean, I think they're in a similar. I mean, it's a similar side, isn't it, to last year? They're in a similar spot, which is essentially that they need Josh Butler to be ridiculous, and if he is ridiculous, they've got a really good shot. I mean, Yuzi Chahal was up there with the wickets, wasn't he, last year? And that also helps. They need standout performers. They need someone in that batting unit to go big a lot, and they need their strike bowlers to perform at the top end of what they normally do. And if that happens, they'll be fine. But it's again more of like a reliant on big performances than reliant on the team, sort of everyone chipping in, I think.
I think they do. I think they're a bit better than just needing some standout performances, because I think they've got some really, really good players.
Well, I think they're in a position of needing standout performances, but they also have some of the best players in the world to do that.
It's a bit of a scale, I think. But I think they've got a lot. Like, I don't think it's like 3 like at Mumbai Indians. I think they've got sort of 6 pretty good players here. Like Butler is top of the class. Sampson's top of the class. Hetmeyer's really, really, really good. You're pretty happy with Bolt as a power play bowler, aren't you? Chahal was pretty phenomenal last year. I don't really see why the Indian national team have gone off him so badly. I think maybe they just don't understand variance or something like that. But I think he's pretty good there. And then the support cast, like Ashwin and Holder are in your support class. They're pretty good players. Now, I think the super sub it really benefits them as well, because I think it solves to some extent the problem that they had last year, where they needed to use Ashwin as a pinch blocker and stuff like that, because it should mean that flexibility no longer needs to come from the 11. Double down, or you can double down on that point by adding Holder. You no longer have to use Ashwin in that role. So I think they were probably better than I gave them credit for last year. And I think that adding Holder and the addition of the super sub rule makes them even better. And I think in my original predictions, I had them 5th. I think I'd swap them with somebody in the playoffs. I think going through this team, I think we're looking for real big problems here. And I don't think there's huge glaring issues in the team. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and look, there's holes in every squad, because ultimately the auction dynamic dictates the fact that it's incredibly difficult to cover all bases with the money that you've got. But I think they've done a reasonable job of doing so, and there are several reservations that I do have. A lack of death bowling, which I think someone else has already mentioned, is an issue. I think it's unrealistic, a bit like Dinesh Karthik at RCB. Unrealistic and unfair to expect Josh Butler to have as good a season as he did last year. I think, there's no doubt that they're both good players, but they're still massive outlier seasons that are really, really tricky to replicate. They also, I think they've done a good job with getting Jason Holder, and I think someone else mentioned, in terms of getting that much better balance and a little bit of extra batting depth as well. And in a world, I don't know what sometimes I wonder what world I live in when Jason Holder costs 1/3 of the amount of money as Cameron Green, for example. So that's a good astute bit of business, I think, for Rajasthan there. So yeah, they've got a lot of strengths. I like the fact that they've got a lot of bench options, and they'll probably, I think they view themselves as a bit of an innovating team. So I'm sure that they're gonna look to use the impact sub, hopefully from their point of view, quite astutely. I think with fair wins, this is a team that could win the tournament. I definitely think that I'd be surprised if they didn't come in the top 4.
It's interesting you talk about the kind of death bowling piece, because you've seen them try and use Trent Bolt kind of in that space, and so there is an opportunity here where they do have a replacement opportunity because Prashid Krishna is out. We mentioned for the Mumbai side that Sandeep Sharma might be an option kind of in that space. They've already got Saini, they've already got Kuldeep Sen. Could you see them trying to use Bolt towards the back end of the innings, maybe up front for one or up front for two, and then splitting him 2 and 2, and then trying to use the super sub to kind of balance that out?
I think if you do that, you're negating the reason why you bought Trent Bolt to start. And ultimately, for me, his strength's always been as that more power play oriented type bowler. And I think, you're asking a guy to certainly fill a hole he might not prefer to do, and generally logic would go against a little bit, I think would be fair to say. And this is where sometimes I do think that teams sometimes they should probably look at their gap usage and the pathway for players to get into the team a little bit more, because it's all very well kind of accumulating this great group of players, but if they don't really have anyone who can fulfill certain roles, then that is a problem that they're going to face. So I think that ultimately that's probably going to be an Achilles heel if they have one.
There. So, gents, do we agree with Dan?
I think they've got a really good chance. Yeah.
Solid playoff shout.
Brilliant. Well, breakout player. It's a difficult one because they're going to play a very, very similar 11 to who was around last year.
Is it Rian Parag's year?
No, I think it's probably going to be Jaiswal's. I think Jaiswal's done really well in kind of the Indian domestic game. I know it's slightly different in terms of the format, but I also think he's had a couple of years to bed in now. They've given him that, that experience and probably that responsibility as well. And when you're playing around people like Joss Buttler and Sanju Samson and Hetmeyer, you surely pick up some bits for your game where you're just like, oh, actually, I could probably do that as well. Jaiswal would be the standout for me. Dan, what about you?
Okay, so I think Jaiswal is probably a little bit past that breakthrough player kind of status now. I really rate him quite highly, and I think it would be kind of a safe option, an easier option to choose Rian Parag because of the fact that ultimately at lower levels his numbers are like way better than players of his age, and sooner or later he will have to translate that to the IPL. But ultimately this is also a player who's probably played about 3 seasons now in the IPL. He's not really a breakthrough player, I think, in that respect. So I'm going to go for a completely random name. It's probably new to you guys or some of the listeners as well. I'm going to go for a batter called Abdul Basith from Kerala. Now, this guy has sort of broken through in the lower levels of Indian cricket as a sort of like a 5 to 7, number 5 to number 7 type finisher. He looks to be an absolute intent merchant from his stats, 6 hitting machine, and could be really, really useful as that impact sub when they're trying to lengthen that batting order that they probably needed to have last year. And also it's worth mentioning as well in that respect that Sanju Samson's his captain at Kerala as well. So he'll have a really good idea of his strengths. And I think that could be quite a niche pick and someone that I'm really, really keen to keep an eye on. In terms of like sort of the data dynamics, I suppose you might make him quite similar to like an Abdul Samad or something like that, who I think would also be, we'll go on to Sunrisers in a minute, is quite suited to that impact player role.
Nice. Well, that wraps up Rajasthan. Definitely in the hunt for playoffs, if not the top 2. We'll take a quick break and we will be back with the team that our Patreon listeners think are going to finish first.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.